The Compliance Life details the journey to and in the role of a Chief Compliance Officer. How does one come to sit in the CCO chair? What are some of the skills a CCO needs to successfully navigate the compliance waters in any company? What are some of the top challenges CCOs have faced, and how did they meet them? These questions and many others will be explored in this new podcast series. The Compliance Life is hosted by Tom Fox, and each month he'll present the story of one CCO through 4 episodes. The Compliance Life is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
This month I visit with Gwen Hassan. Gwen is the Managing Counsel and Director of Compliance at CNH Industrial. Gwen has had a long career in compliance, literally starting in the 1990s in the healthcare industry with Blue Cross when compliance was just beginning to get started in healthcare. She went to law school while she was working at Blue Cross and then took a variety of jobs, largely in-house, gravitating into the compliance field. It's a fascinating story of the twists and turns of everyone's career. We take a look at, during this podcast series, Gwen's professional background and what led her to pursue a career in compliance. We look at how she balances the practice of law with the practice of compliance. This is somewhat unusual, and this is the first time we've had someone having both roles in a corporation. She talks about her favorite parts about being a compliance officer and why it's necessary to be culturally curious. She gives advice about people who are interested in the compliance field. And we conclude with a podcast on one of Gwen's passions, which is fighting the scourge of human trafficking and the role of the compliance professional in that fight. I know you'll enjoy this month's series. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back for our 4th and final episode of The Compliance Life for this month, where I visited with Gwen Hassan. First of all, welcome back, Gwen.
Thanks, Tom.
Gwen, the first time I met you was around a talk you gave on human trafficking. And I can't remember the year, maybe 2015 or so. And I knew nothing about human trafficking at that point. And you were really one of the earliest people I was aware of in our profession who was talking about this. So I was wondering if we might be able to talk about your passion around that issue and what got you interested in it, and how you have worked for helping develop a corporate solution to this terrible scourge.
Absolutely. It is something I'm very, very passionate about. It started for me because I was working at the time for a federal contractor, a defense contractor. And as you may recall, it was about a decade ago, there were a number of kind of high-profile cases related to contractors that were using forced labor in the performance of military contracts. There was, a very unfortunate and famous case of a number of young women who were hired by a recruiter to be hairdressers in a particular military base location, and were promised, of course, huge amounts of money that they could send back to their families, and were moved to this military base, but of course were not actually hairdressers, and were living in a storage container on the edge of the base, and were being forced into prostitution at that military base. So because at the time the client that I was working for had a government contracting group and a federal defense contract, was my first kind of entree into learning about human trafficking. And it started with the ITAR regulations, the DFAR regulations, that make it clear that federal contractors cannot be involved in any kind of at the time, it referred to mostly sexual trafficking and sex acts. I got to tell you, you want to have a challenging experience. Try standing in front of an auditorium full of 95% male coworkers and explaining to them the federal definition of a sex act. It was a day I will not forget anytime soon. But in any case, so from there, I started to learn more about the fact that sex trafficking is, from a statistical standpoint, a tiny percentage of a much larger problem, which is the trafficking of people in general, forced labor. And so it really caught my interest from that starting point. And I started doing more research on it, trying to figure out where it was, where it emanated from. Was my company at risk of being involved in this? Were there other types of trafficking that I should be aware of? And it became something that I was just personally really, really passionate about and really interested in. I've had throughout my life kind of a soft spot for the less privileged and for those that are struggling. And I think this kind of married my career with some of my personal beliefs, which is that each of us are here to make the world a better place, not to take advantage of people in the process. So it gave me an entree into working with a couple of different organizations to try and figure out what companies could do. The idea stemmed from an analysis that's really supply chain related, which is, way back to school, right? Which is, in order for there to be a supply, there must be a demand. Econ 101. And if companies are creating a demand inadvertently by their practices in their supply chain, then we're part of the problem. And I wanted to make sure that, to the extent I could, I started looking at how to eliminate that demand and put controls in place that could prevent the company from being part of a bad supply chain, if you will.
And Gwen, that was the second part of this conversation or dialogue I've had with you that struck me is you have really focused on the solution that a corporation can put in place. In our last episode, you talked a little bit about where you saw the profession heading into 2025 and beyond. And it seemed to me that compliance around human trafficking or human slavery, as it's called in the United Kingdom, that's part or will be a part of the compliance professional's role. So I was wondering if you could give us your thoughts on that, and then what can a corporation put in place to help fight this scourge?
I do think it's the role of the compliance program overall, and compliance professionals in a broader sense, in a moral sense, if you will, to try and create a culture of compliance, a culture that honors integrity and ethics. And human trafficking, human slavery is part of that effort, which is, if you are a company that values making the world a better place through your company activities, whether it's building something that the company needs, or that the world needs, producing food that the world needs, providing services that the world needs. If you're doing that without paying attention to the side effects of your business, which could be dangerous to the world, whether that's poor sustainability practices, or whether that's corruption or fraud, or whether that's trafficking in persons, I think you're leaving out a part of the equation. In order to have a successful and effective compliance program, you have to build in the attention to the culture overall and what you're rewarding in the people who work for your company. So I see that as a natural fit for compliance, because a compliance program's ultimate goal, in my opinion, is to create a culture, is to create a place that people feel safe and they feel like there is integrity at the core of things that the company does and decisions that they make, that there is an organizational justice present in that organization. So if that is the highest aim of a compliance program, to create that culture, then prevention of human trafficking and slavery is part and parcel of doing that. Along with, as I think I mentioned in a prior episode, the focus on diversity and inclusion and sustainability overall. Your company can't be diverse and can't be inclusive and can't be sustainable if its practices are in any way supporting the trafficking of persons or the forced slavery of persons.
We've seen some, I think, powerful examples where companies have been accused of having products, whether it be shrimp, whether it be fish, whether it be manufactured products, whether it be clothing, developed or manufactured or derived from human trafficking, and the social response and the reputational damage to those corporations has been almost instantaneous in some cases. Is that a message you think that resonates with business leaders, that this can be a significant amount of reputational damage to your company and you need to take steps to prevent this as well?
In boards around the world, people are seeing really the potentially huge and, as you said, instantaneous loss of shareholder value that can occur when even if it's a baseless allegation is levied against their company for some type of human rights violation. And I think that carries a great deal of weight with a board, because their ultimate goal, of course, their ultimate job is to protect and to build shareholder value. So if they are not addressing issues related to modern slavery, they are creating risk of loss of shareholder value. So I think the long answer is yes, I agree. I think it's a very big and important motivator for companies. And I think people see it often, in my experience, as kind of this separate issue that needs to be tackled. And they don't know where to start, and they feel kind of overwhelmed by the tragedy of what they're talking about, of human trafficking, of forced labor. I would argue, though, that that's not the right approach. That the best approach for a company to take is that it is part and parcel of a good supply chain. And just as you would check your supply chain, audit your supply chain, put control processes in place to prevent sole sourcing in a supply chain, or prevent having a complete disruption of your supply chain. If you view human trafficking and modern slavery with the same lens as something that could lead to complete disruption of your supply chain, then it becomes another factor for consideration that is not easily, but well targeted by some of the same interventions, the same types of monitoring, the same types of diligence activities and auditing that you would do for other issues in your supply chain. You can also do related to slavery and forced labor.
Gwen, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. I wanted to thank you. This has been just a great series. And I hope at some point the pandemic will end and we can actually see each other in person again.
Me too. Absolutely, Tom. It would be. I miss people. I miss seeing you in person and so many of my other compliance colleagues. And I look forward to being able to do so later this year. Let's hope. Fingers crossed.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Thank you again for listening to this episode of The Compliance Life. I hope you will join me again next week, where I take up another episode with Scott Sullivan in The Compliance Life. The Compliance Life is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. If you would like to be featured on The Compliance Life, please give me an email at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Also, if you like this series, please give us a rating on iTunes. Any review and rating would definitely help get the word out about the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network. Thanks again.